Good to go.
Yep, and anytime. We'll let Patrick do a bit of intro, or I'll do a bit of intro, one or the
other. So that's Vladimir, who's from Drupal land in Brisbane. So Vladimir helped out, was partaking in Pizza Bugs and Fun last year in October with Stuart and Mick. So he's I haven't worked out whether he's just had the taste of Joomla, or whether he's a full-blown Drupal megalomaniac that codes like there's nothing else going on. But he can introduce himself there. And then have we also got Jana going to talk later as well? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And so Jana, there's Jana, who's works with Vladimir at Tomato Elephant Studio. Is that right? All right. So I'm sure that I'll say more about that. So after Vlad, there'll be a short session on a few things that Jana's found out on a couple of topics, which I've forgotten the thing that was in the spiel, but we'll get to that later. And then we'll be covering a few little things on Joomla. So I'll hand over to Vlad if everyone can mute and put questions in the chat. And we'll come back to those at the end of the session. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more about what Bootstrap 5 actually does. And then anyone that's super keen can get up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning and join the Joomla UK guys. And they're actually a couple of the programmers that have put Bootstrap into Joomla 4. So they know what the impact is of Bootstrap on Joomla 4. Yeah, hopefully Vladimir's about to tell us what it is that all this means. I'll hand you over.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Stuart. Is there a way to get rid of the loop? Okay, cool. That's good. Sorry, just some technical issues. Let me share my screen. Excellent. Can everyone see my screen? I still can feel some feedback from someone's mic.
Can I show what's on the screen? Not on.
I think Janice, she's turned off. Everyone's.
Okay, me because I'm not.
Yep, that's it. All good.
It wasn't my mic. I thought it was maybe my mic, but
I muted you. Okay. And yeah, so if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me anytime. So this is going to be a presentation mostly about Bootstrap 5. So first about myself. So I'm Vladimir, and I'm based in Brisbane. I work for Tomato Elephant Studio. I do Drupal as a day-to-day job, but before that, I was actually doing quite a bit of Joomla back in the day, like late 2000s. I'm also quite passionate about a few other open source projects. So GitLab, Bootstrap, Drupal, and Docker are a few of them that I either try to contribute or contributing to this day. Actually, a fun fact is when I discovered Joomla back in the company's policy, I think that was around 2006 or 2007, the company's policy was to only run Oracle databases. So I thought, I can do that because we were using Joomla at the time for actually bug reporting system. So I built quickly bug reporting system. I was so fascinated with discovering Joomla. So I actually went on a mission to migrate Joomla to Oracle database. Well, the thing never happened, but it was a good attempt and actually trying to learn the estimation of the large open source projects. Now to Bootstrap. So today we're going to talk about what Bootstrap is, what's new in Bootstrap 5, and we'll talk a bit about Joomla and Bootstrap. So first of all, what is a Bootstrap? So if you go on the homepage of the getbootstrap.com, it says build fast responsive sites with a Bootstrap. In a nutshell, it's a collection of CSS and JavaScript files that allows you to do a rapid prototyping and quickly build web pages. In fact, it's one of the most used CSS JavaScript frameworks in the world. It has more than 130,000 stars on GitHub. I forgot to include the screenshot, but I guess the next framework is, I think, half of that. So we have quite a big gap. Quite a big gap between Bootstrap and other systems. So Bootstrap has quite an interesting history. It had roots in Twitter. So two guys who work in Twitter, they decided to do CSS frameworks because no one was doing them. So one guy started doing Twitter Bootstrap, another guy started doing Foundation. They both became quite successful, but Foundation was always a bit more optimized, whereas Twitter Bootstrap always appeared more to designers and look and feelers, like people who look at the UX. So obviously Bootstrap became more popular with non-developing community as well. And now I can actually claim as one of the top CSS and JavaScript framework. So late last year, the version 5 was released, and we're going to talk a bit more about what's actually in version 5 and see some changes. And last week, February 11, last week, the beta 2 of Bootstrap 5 was released with some changes. The next one, beta 3 release, they're planning to have it. They might as well. If there's going to be no breaking bugs, they actually would label it as stable. So we're actually looking in the next couple of months to see the Bootstrap 5 stable version. I'm going to jump to Bootstrap website, and we're just going to go and have a look at things there. So the interesting thing to look at and to introduce the Bootstrap is actually an examples, which is now made it to top menu. And you can click examples on the Get Bootstrap. And if you click on, for example, this pricing example, obviously you're seeing something like that. You can recognize familiar patterns and obviously see the familiar designs. And in fact, this year shows that when things like Shopify and Wix became much more popular than your conventional CMSs, it actually shows that a lot of customers actually striving to have a similar look and feel, nice and stable and responsive. And that's exactly what Bootstrap is. So it's actually nice, responsive mobile first framework, which thousands of eyes looking over from a testing perspective, from a development perspective, and from building websites perspective. So here's another example of building the gallery, an album example. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna just turn on mobile device. And you can see, so even for the maybe something bigger. There we go. So it's nice and responsive on mobile. So you obviously seen something like that. So stripe layouts are also quite popular, and single page layouts. So Bootstrap is quite good in that as well. So you can see the common components that Bootstrap use from a CSS perspective. You have a navigation bar, form components. You have your tiles. You have your jumbotrons, sizes of the images. From JavaScript perspective, you have your responsible elements. You have your mobile elements. You have something like sliders, tabs, and other elements as well that you can include either as a single element using separate JavaScript file, or you can include the whole library together. Bootstrap also became quite popular of using it as a dashboard. So I'm just trying to find the example. So here's the example of the forms. So also looks very familiar with the rounded corners and elements like list here. So a lot of I don't know, routers, internet routers, and other software providers, they actually incorporate Bootstrap into Internet of Things because it's actually quite nice and easy to build dashboards with. Here's some financial dashboard example where you have a graph, you also have a table, have a menu on the left. So very similar patterns. So if we go back to the actual homepage of the Bootstrap, and so you have your documentation, so you can go and browse what's there. And this takes us over the element, the building blocks, and the elements and the building blocks and the components of the Bootstrap here. So we'll go through a few. So the first one is obviously a table, so layouts. And the grid layouts are very common ones. So Bootstrap by default out of the box comes with 12 grid layout framework. So you can go and space your columns. Has an explanation here. What are the breakpoints for different sizes? So with Bootstrap 5, there are 6 sizes, but we'll touch a bit later. And then it explains how to build the different size tables and layouts using 12 grid layout. So you have columns, and you basically specify, okay, I want to, 6 column here, or 4 column each here. So I have 3 columns. There is also additional classes you can use to make it a bit more wider, spread it, or use, like 2 columns, then 6 columns, then 2 columns again. So very common if you use the CSS or JavaScript framework before. So it also big on typography. It has a lot of classes related to, headings, display headings, something like lid right here. So inline text template, so you can use the classes and tags to do some highlighting on some text decorations, and other tech utilities like block codes, aligning left and right, and it keeps going further. So it's big on forms as well. So as you've seen before, form control elements are all covered by Bootstrap. And in documentation here, it goes through different elements and how to use them, how they look when they're disabled. Talks a bit about accessibility as well. So another good thing about Bootstrap 4, if you're using it out of the box, it's actually Bootstrap 5 is accessible as well. So they really work on accessibility and trying to make sure that you have a right contrast, that it's good for screen readers. So actually every version, and I've been working with Bootstrap, I think still it's version 3. That's all I can remember. Maybe before that I was using it, but not like consciously knowing which version I was using. But 3, 4, and then 5, every time there's a big leap in accessibility. So things for screen readers, support for left to right, right to left text, and all the components that sometimes you hide the label visually. It's all covered here, and accessibility is quite a big thing for Bootstrap. So we can look at some of the JavaScript components. So things like accordions. So you actually have your standard accordion already pre-built here. So there is no need to actually go and search for a separate library or to go and reinvent the wheel. Carousel, that's another thing that we'll look at one of the examples. So here's the examples of the carousel. So you can actually, the first example was just carousel by itself. Here you have navigation controls, and it goes further with different navigation controls. Support for different sizes of the devices, text, and so on and so forth. So I strongly encourage you, if you are using Bootstrap and didn't know much about it, how to use specific classes, just go and have a look through the documentation. It's nicely written, and it will give you a lot of insights how to use the proper tables and classes and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's lots of components. We can go through them all night, but I would really encourage you to just go and explore. So now we're going to have a look what's actually new in Bootstrap 5 and how it's different from Bootstrap 4. I'm not going to cover everything, but I'm going to cover some elements, and then there was going to be a couple of articles that I'll share that you can go and check out yourself. So one of the biggest thing is jQuery was removed. So that's a big thing because Bootstrap was relying on jQuery all the time. So this is the first major version where jQuery was removed. I'm going to talk about it a bit further when we're going to talk about Joomla, that Joomla actually is doing something very similar. Everything is rewritten in vanilla JavaScript rather than reliance on jQuery. And jQuery is still a good library. I still use it almost day to day on a lot of projects, but JavaScript matured quite significantly, and now there is all the plugins, all the sliders, carousels, drop downs were actually rewritten. Responsive font sizes, so there is now ability to actually add responsive font sizes. So as before, you would be able to add image and put the specific class that signifies it as a responsive image, where it would go and stretch to a particular size and then stay at the particular width for a desktop. Now you can do the same for font sizes. Another big thing is drop for Internet 10 and 11, Internet Explorer 10 and 11. So that means that they are removing a lot of deprecated CSS and JavaScript that was catering for very old browsers. But now, even with Microsoft saying most of their products are not supporting Internet Explorer 10 and 11, it's definitely time to move on. So even the big and popular frameworks like Bootstrap are dropping the support for legacy browsers. There is a lot of changes and improvements in actual tables, like this example is change of gather width unit of measurement. So they actually, I think they changed to REM now. So before, yeah, there was a calculation of how much gather to use. So this is very specific, but because now you have a lot of classes like M0, which signifies margin 0, P0. So once you go P1, the way they calculate the margins change to support more devices and more viewports. Removed card decks. So not the cards, but the card decks was something the Bootstrap community says it was more like a hack where you put a lot of cards together, for example, to display gallery. And this is because they're removing the card decks just because the Flexbox is a default format of displaying list. And now it actually gets support in all browsers and became much nicer. So there is no more support required for things like card decks, which before was a bit hacky to use with the Flexbox. Optimize the navigation bar. Again, there was, I don't want to like grill you with a lot of the details, but there was a few hacks you need to do to build a very complex navigation bar. For example, if you want to incorporate the form, the menu, the responsive the menu, the responsive menu, and other things in navigation bar. For example, here it's a good example of navbar. So you have a title, drop down, search, and once you make it responsive, like it all needs to go into the drop down menu. So now it takes about maybe a third or a half of the text that you required before in Bootstrap 4. So there was a lot of work. And again, advances in CSS and JavaScript helped to create something like navbar much easier, which you don't think as a big problem when you use it. You think, oh, it's a nice navbar. So it looks pretty simple, like a title, a menu, a form. But once you actually start using it, making sure it's responsive and reacts to what you do, it's not that easy to do. So next thing is a custom SVG icon library. So they move it now to the top, and you can go icons. It is downloadable as a separate library. So if you're using something like Font Awesome, you probably know what I'm talking about. But Bootstrap now has, I think it's a few hundred, so almost 1,000 icons. Maybe with the 1.3, they actually hit the 1,000 icons. It's not as extensive, I found, as a Font Awesome, but Font Awesome was there for a while. And this one is tightly coupled with Bootstrap. So it's very nice to use with the Bootstrap. So, you get all your standard icons. Not much of the corporate stuff. Yep, no Joomla either, no Drupal. So I think there's Facebook, and you can use for the icons of the social media. But if you used Font Awesome before, they actually have all the major content management system icons as well. Still, it's, if you're using Bootstrap day-to-day, why not to use the icons as well? Next thing is they switched help. So the help I was searching just now, it was written in Jekyll. If there are any fans of the static websites. So now they switched all the documentation source to Hugo. Again, for the end user, it doesn't mean much. For people who actually contribute to Bootstrap, contribute to their documentation, you need to know how to compile things in Hugo and how to commit things in Hugo rather than Jekyll. So if you're interested to know more about it, just Google static websites Hugo, or head to Bootstrap documentation, see how you can contribute to that. And there's lots and lots of class updates. Simple example would be, before it used to have no getter class, now it's optimized to G0, as I was talking before. So now G0, M1 would stand for margin 1, MX1 would stand for margin on the X-axis, so vertical margins 1. And they add in more and more classes, like from alignment to other different things. And also for different components, there are different classes as well. So there's lots of classes available out of the box for you to use. That's why I always find it's a good idea to go and just check out what sort of classes you have, so you won't reinvent and you won't invent extra CSS when you don't need to. So probably one more thing, they're making it a bit easier to do a Sass compilation. So I think the variables are now a bit more compactly presented. I think you need to compile them all now. And when overriding, you actually have access to all the variables. So there are some updates for Sass compilation. Again, this is more for developers. So with Joomla, the last thing I'm going to talk about is Joomla 4 will ship with Bootstrap 5. That announcement was made actually also, 3 weeks ago. And there are a few reasons for that. I'm going to share the whole article. I'm not going to, I wanted to list all the points they have there, but I think it's a good read for you to go to joomla.org and read it if you haven't read it. But there are a few kind of big things there. So first thing, stable releases are aligned. So Joomla 4 is about to be released probably in the first half of this year. Bootstrap 5 will be released probably in maximum in a couple of months, probably less. So also after using previous versions of Bootstrap 4, Joomla community kind of said it's very stable even with beta releases. And I think they were testing the beta 1 of Bootstrap 5 and they said it's very, very stable. So we're quite sure. So it would align with our goal not to introduce breaking changes, and doesn't look like there's going to be any breaking changes introduced from Bootstrap perspective. So there is more about it in this article. So I'm going to share it on the Meetup website. But yeah, they actually go and talk about it, what the experience was with Joomla, why they actually decided to stay and move to Bootstrap 5, and some other things as well. So I really recommend to read this article. And as I said, I will share all the links, including some of the articles actually from this Joomla article that say what are the differences between Bootstrap 4 and Bootstrap 5 there as well. So do we have any questions?
No.
So Jenny asked in the chat, do you have to code to use Bootstrap? And that's a no. So the big thing that Joomla does is that all of the things like alerts and layouts and things like that are quite often controlled by the template. Russell's added there that Joomla will apply all the Bootstrap styles to its own elements for you to use. So what's going to happen is that they've put Bootstrap 5 into all the things that create the user effects in the admin area. So the back end is all using using Bootstrap 5. The front end, it's up to the template developers as to whether they use Bootstrap 5 or a different version or a different framework altogether. And so that all comes down to what flavor of template you're using and what they choose to do with Cassiopeia, which is the default Joomla 4 template that ships with Joomla 4. That's now been upgraded to Bootstrap 5 as well. So I think, I'm just looking who's there. Stuart's probably the one that's played with that a bit more than most people that I'm aware of. It comes down next after that to the things that you've done or that you're trying to do. So some of the stuff that Vladimir showed there to do with the flex grid, that's probably the biggest departure from some of the older ways to do layout in Joomla, in Joomla 3. Flex grid, I've accidentally switched to about 18 months ago when I worked out that it does a far better job than the Zen tool stuff I'd been using for a while. Vladimir, can you explain a little more on how you, like, flex grid basically just means that you just say, okay, I want to make a table of columns. So I say that I start with a column, and then inside that I've got a few rows, and then inside the rows I've got a number of cells inside of that. As well as doing the button thing there as well. So
There you go. Unmuted now. So yeah, Flex Grid has a bit different approach to your normal grid, because your normal grid is kind of preset. So if it's 12 columns, it's 12. You cannot add 13 columns unless you recompile. Flex Grid actually does what Flex is. So getting a bit more flexible elements in, or cater for the elements when it's not just, you know, your 12 column grid and you try to fit either 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 12 things. So it's a bit more flexible. And if you go to like search for Flex in the documentation, it talks about Flex and Flex utilities specifically in the Bootstrap, but it also gives you an examples where you go deflex, padding 2, highlight, you get a container full width. But inline flex in this particular case would actually have your container just to the width of your content. This is a very, very simple example. And then it goes into more classes, saying you can have a flex inline container for, you know, for your mobile devices, but you can have flexible container which fills the whole thing for example, desktop. Then it goes into a multiple items example, saying, okay, so if it would be a grid, those items would actually fit one or more columns in this grid, whereas here it would stack the items and keep on stacking them until it hit the full width. And then you can because of that, you can easily just rearrange them. And using flex flow reverse class here, you can actually, if you look at the example, it goes 1, 2, 3, and second example goes 3, 2, 1. So you actually rearrange it without rearranging the actual HTML. Same goes for the vertical. In this particular case, the class is flex column, where you can easily display 1 to 3 as a list, and then 3 to 1 when you just say column reverse. And again, it goes list of classes for all the responsible sizes. One thing I forgot to mention, they added for the, because devices are getting bigger, one of the changes they introduced to Bootstrap 5 is 6 breaking point XXL for the very large devices as well. So, and you can see they go in the next example where the items are actually flexed, and then you can justify them. So you can put them all in the middle, shift them all to the left, shift them all to the right, disperse them either by, you know, docking them to corners or having them right in the middle. So there is even separation, around separation, between separation, and all that. So you can actually see how it is different from the grid. You can actually do a lot of things here, and you can continue on. So this is about the flex. So just go through those examples and you'll get a better understanding. They're always trying to say that flex is something like it's very hard to explain, but these examples actually show you how easy it is to use flex. Of course, you can get into trouble just because it is too flexible sometimes. So keep that in mind. But so far, yeah, the examples here are great to actually understand what Flexbox is.
So Jenny, does that have we sort of answered your question there? That you throw in classes into things. So if you were writing a Joomla article and you're adding a link or want to make something a button, then when you're inserting the link, you can just throw some Bootstrap classes straight into the classes field in JCE or whichever browser you're using, and then that'll jump it so that it converts it straight into a button and things like that. So a good tip would be to study the Bootstrap documentation, I think, and work out your own sort of cheat sheet as to the standard things you might use. There's a significant amount of things in there, and it makes it do some amazing things. With the accordions, Vlad, is there a way that you can trigger it? So I'll just check. I've got an issue on the actual Joomla.org site at the moment where they haven't put the IDs in, so you can't jump down to an accordion. I see that the IDs are in there, but is there a way to make it so that when you trigger the accordion, it opens straight up? Or
I haven't played with the API, but there was always, that's why they're written as a JavaScript components. There was API to actually open a specific thing. So let me share the screen. Let's go quickly again to the documentation and look at the accordion. So there used to be a collapsible accessibility section. So components here. So I guess they removed the API from here via JavaScript. Here we go. So via JavaScript, it would tell you which options you have, and you can toggle a specific specific thing. So it's yep, via JavaScript.
So you have to add a database parent tag.
Yep.
With toggle equals true. Okay. When I get back to that problem, I'll remember that that's there. So, what do we got there? So Carly, you've got some work to do, I see.
Yeah, pretty much all my templates are based on Bootstrap 4, and I do a mod menu override for the main menu and use Bootstrap for that. And then I use cards to grab articles within categories. So I do a module override for my articles categories list, and so that I can have like a nice picture, title, button, all of that. So yeah, a bit of work to do when I upgrade, but it's not too bad.
Yeah.
I've been going from Bootstrap 2, 3, 4, so it should be okay. I love it, so that's fun for me.
It sort of leads into Russell's question about from the vendor's perspective. So what sort of conversion process do you think they'll have to go to? I know that with the Joomla stuff, well, the Joomla backend, they'd only been using Bootstrap 4 for a lot of vendor effects, not vendor effects, for a lot of layout effects. So there wasn't a lot of things that were needing to be changed. But that said, when they did the process of moving or investigating 4 to 5, and then they heavily tested against the version 5 beta, they additionally found another 150 issues that were Bootstrap 2 items that had been missed and hadn't been upgraded to 4 in the past. So they had 150 issues that they had to go back and create a new pull request for. Vladimir, have you found that is it going to be a hard conversion process for a lot of things, or is it straightforward?
So for Drupal, I'm looking after Bootstrap 4 theme. So I created Bootstrap 5, basically copying all the code and just doing some minor fixes for navbar, because as I mentioned before, navbar becomes much easier. That's where I realized what was actually needed, half of the code that goes there. Apart from that, people raise a few issues here and there, but overall, in your kind of vanilla Bootstrap, nothing too crazy. It actually wasn't too much to do. Obviously, if you're using some specific things, and again, I didn't go too far into testing, so we just released the alpha version. From that perspective, it was nothing was severely broken, apart from a toolbar. But I'm sure there's going to be more things too. As you mentioned before, there would be bugs here and there, and it is a big rewrite. But it's good. Like one of the plans for them was they actually, I think, wanted to move to post CSS instead of Sass. And I was wondering what's that, because they used to use less as well. But looks like they decided not to and keep in Sass. So from that perspective, a lot of developer tools are still the same. And so parts of the system stayed very stable. So I think the migration, and there are migration articles there to, for example, someone raised an issue, no gutters changed to G0. So yeah, a few classes here and there you would need to go and change. But overall, again, as I said, looks like the core stayed the same.
Tim asked, with the removal of jQuery, is there a noticeable performance increase?
I think it's just the flavor of the months. I mean, we live in a time where, loading jQuery on any device, on any connection is not it's not going to stop your page severely from, it's not going to crash your page because there's like 3 kilobytes of extra JavaScript or CSS. So in my perspective, it didn't, but because it's a flavor of the month, and also the browsers get to the point that we can actually write a good plugins in plain JavaScript. So again, good and bad. Probably good for jQuery and jQuery users. I still think there is a place for jQuery to be used, but if they were able to rewrite plugins, same as Joomla, to rewrite plugins using plain JavaScript, that's great, because Drupal has a lot of work to do. The Drupal just deprecated jQuery UI, and I don't think there's near future we would be able to deprecate jQuery. It still has a lot of takes a lot of leverage from the functionality perspective.
Anyone else can feel free to unmute and ask questions themselves. Russell, you've got one on date pickers, which are always a favorite UX headache. So Russell's question, Russell, here he comes, here we go. I'll let you ask it, Russell.
Oh yeah, Vlad, do you know whether or not there's any change in function or support for date pickers between BS4 and 5? Did you see any of that?
There you go. I actually haven't used date picker in Bootstrap 5 yet. I'm just going through documentation of migration documentation. Doesn't look like there is any date changes.
Okay.
So,
must be the old ones then, the older versions.
they actually don't provide the date picker as an element, so it might be a component, a third-party component.
Yep, okay.
As such, because I don't think Bootstrap provides the date picker. It's probably, again, some other component that uses Bootstrap, or someone build a custom Bootstrap together using the normal elements like drop downs.
That's interesting. But date fields a data type. You would think. You would think that'd be on their list. I'll have a look.
No, so in the form, yeah, there is the documentation doesn't have any references to calendar or date picker. So date picker is actually a custom implementation. I'm sure there are libraries to do that. One of them is actually jQuery UI, and another one, yes, now there's HTML5 date pickers, but because of the browser inconsistency, I'm not sure if you can cater for them, because each browser tries to just render date picker differently in HTML5 format. We actually were looking at it last week as an issue, and I don't think HTML5 date pickers are very useful at this point. I mean, some jQuery plugins are doing a great job on that.
Okay.
Okay, last question. Anyone?
Cool. I know that that's opened up now a few other questions. I'll run past the Joomla programming team. The guys in London are just coming online now, so I'll shoot them a few more questions tonight before their presentation, and then be watching that one back later as well, and then we'll see what else they come back with as to what they've found in the actual implementation of Bootstrap 5 in Joomla. But I know when they got excited and decided to rush it in, they figured that let's get up to the next version, seeing we're so far back with Joomla 5. So now for our next trick. So Jana works with Vladimir